Hello, everyone. This is Scott Reese and Jim Caswell greeting you today on behalf of the Commercial Board Education Committee. We hope that you are all safe and well and that you are enjoying our weekly video snacks. We look forward to being back together at our education seminars in the coming months. Jim?
Thank you, Scott. And this is Jim Caswell. We'd like to say first and foremost that none of this would be possible without the support of our annual corporate sponsors and our annual education sponsors. They have been longtime supporters of the ACBR, and let's be sure the next time you have a video chat or you see one of our sponsors, you thank them for their support. We hope you enjoy the videos. We hope that you stay safe out there.
Hello, Atlanta Commercial Board of Realtor audience. This podcast is COVID-19 from the tenant's perspective. We are certainly in an unprecedented time of uncertainty accompanied by fiscal and financial loss. That said, there are some good things that have come from the environment we're in shelter in place. One of which is being able to benefit society by binge watching Netflix. I don't know if you guys are homeschooling your children, but I certainly never thought that that was going to be happening in my lifetime. But looking back on some of this time we've spent with our loved ones, certainly grateful for the additional meals at the dinner table, long bike rides and walks, and the conversations that we've been able to have. Personally, I was happy to learn that I was a natural PE teacher. For some reason, I get satisfaction putting my boys through a timed physical fitness course in the backyard every day. And I certainly want to thank the Atlanta Commercial Board of Realtors today for providing this platform for us and all of our peers to share some of our expertise and thoughts about what's currently going on in the state of our industry and the state of this current market. And I'm certainly proud to belong to a group of such ethical and supportive business leaders. My name is Brooks Morris, and I'm an advisor with Cresa here in Atlanta. And I'm joined today with two of the most respected veterans in their areas of expertise, Jennifer with Hendrick. Good afternoon. And Tom Tindall with Cresa.
Good afternoon.
Jennifer Treter has held a senior leadership position with Hendrick, Inc. for over 18 years. And she has been an owner of Hendrick with her business partner, Chris Hurd, for over 11. Well, Tom Tindall, who is born and raised in Atlanta and has been in the commercial real estate industry for 35 plus years, is a co-founding principal of Cresa Atlanta. Tom, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Brooks.
So as we kind of roll in today's podcast, trying to address COVID-19 from the tenant's perspective, I'm going to shoot some questions Tom's way. And the first question is, Tom, in the current environment, what has been the significant change in the tenancy landscape?
Brooks, quite frankly, everything. We had been trained decades ago on how to deal with the pandemic. And quite frankly, you really don't know that you have it right till you're in the middle of it. Every tenant is going through a unique situation that they've never dealt with before. What are some of the big issues? Obviously, disturbed revenue. Issues like unemployment, deferment, cash conservation, forecasting, uncertainty of need for how much real estate they need. Are they losing their customers? Issues like that. So every company is basically in a major reevaluation stage and forecasting stage.
Certainly unprecedented, and I know that we not only see it with our clients, both Jennifer, I'm sure is same for you, but also internally as we look at our own operations. Nobody is been able to get away from dealing with this environment. Tom, another question for you. What are the major issues and actions being taken by tenants at this time?
Brooks, originally most tenants looked to their lease and went down the road of evaluating the definition of force majeure. Is it an issue if the landlord couldn't have the building open? Did that put them in a situation that they did not have to pay the rent? Keep in mind, rental obligations are typically one of the top 3 expense items for any company. That was not always the intent for force majeure, and that really needed to be tested in court. So that was kind of a dicey issue. You have to look at, from an operating expense standpoint, you have dwindling or forecasted dwindling revenue. So you immediately went to look at your lenders, evaluate how much cash you had on hand, how much money had to go out in a short period of time. So the payment of rent became a major issue. Rent deferment, obviously. Can the landlord help the tenant? Can the tenant go to the landlord and just say, I'm not paying rent? Does the government's SBA plans help them out? Well, 2.5 months over this pandemic and the ramifications of the pandemic is really not that long of a period of time. Can they use part of their security deposit to pay rent? Is that something the landlord will allow? Lease restructuring. Well, the last thing you want to do is restructure a lease when you're in a very bad situation and can't forecast the future. Some companies have had to do that as a last alternative. Last but not least, I'll say that downsizing. Keep in mind, if you can't afford it, you can't pay for it, and some landlords will allow you to downsize. That's not what they want to do. But the bigger issue is tenants have to be able to substantiate the damage that the pandemic has done to their business to the landlord. So those are some of the issues being dealt with right now.
So Tom, that leads me into another question. What are the dynamics during those conversations of a tenant-landlord discussion?
Well, the bigger dynamic is really the word partnership. Keep in mind of the ramifications of a tenant who does not pay rent or cannot pay rent. That can be have a very financial impact to the landlord. So there is really a 3-way partnership between the tenant who pays rent, the landlord who owns the building, and the lender who has loaned the landlord money for the building. There's a partnership there, and can you defer rent and pay it back at a later time? Yes, but the landlord still has debt service under his covenants on his loan, so the lender has to get involved. So it's not as easy as just allowing free rent, because you have to have the lender come to the table. The other part is this enhancing the risk of the landlord? Meaning, is the tenant ever going to be able to pay that deferred rent back? Because if the answer is no, they want to get as much of it as they can. Right now, the different makeups of ownership are critical between how a tenant and a landlord react. Major REITs are right now trying to only deal with those that cannot afford the rent. They do not want those groups going down. Smaller landlords will say, yes, we can defer it so long as at a minimum you're paying operating expenses and debt service. So it really depends on the makeup of who the landlord is and what the lender will allow.
So Tom, as you've seen some of these conversations occur, what have you seen if a tenant's going to ask for a deferment, for instance, what have you seen landlords asking for to even consider it?
Well, on the front end, I'll go back to what I said earlier, is that they want the tenant to confirm that this financial downturn was created by the pandemic. What they're trying to do is work with the real tenants and not somebody who was failing and just jumped onto the pandemic boat. So you're asking for last 2 years of audited financials. You're asking for banking relationships and cash on hand. They're asking for business plans to move forward to prove that they can pay back any rent that is deferred. Keep in mind, between the landlord and the tenant's asking that the landlord incur risk that the tenant has today, meaning the rental obligation. So you've got to get your landlord real comfortable that you'll be able to pay it back. There are a couple of different types of scenarios. You have the tenant who was failing to begin with, and this is his reason to just turn the keys back and say, I'm done. Well, you can't do that really. The other is you have healthy companies that are trying to remain healthy and conserve their cash. Well, there's a fine line in how you can have that conversation. Do you defer it in a shorter period of time? Do you tack it on to the end of the lease? Do you extend the lease? Or do you allow them to access some of the security deposit cash that the landlord has on hand with a promissory note, so to speak, that the tenant will refund or refill the security deposit bucket at a time, in the foreseeable future.
Fantastic. Jennifer, I'm going to kick it over to you for a couple of questions here. Tom's conversation has a lot to do with, as we got into this period of time, the things that immediately needed to be looked at. Tenants needed to dig in and understand their options. And now really it seems like there's a sense of, as Georgia is considering, has opened up, and what does that look like for businesses moving forward? Coming back, the workforce returning is a conversation that's accelerating. What do you think the timing of phase back looks like, and the type of strategy or structure businesses need to be talking about currently?
Yeah, I think that's it's a big question on everybody's mind. And for Georgia specifically, when you consider, just as you mentioned, the idea that we're starting to ease back, businesses are starting to ease back in. We're coming upon the date when the state had set a shelter in place to expire. Many businesses are stepping back to say, what does that look like? And why are we going back to the office? What purpose? Not if the office has purpose, but what purpose does it serve to go back at this point in time? I think unless there's been a critical need for your staff based on their position and how they support your industry to go back, many of our clients, many of the businesses that we are benchmarking, working with in the industry, are stepping back to look at more of a phased approach, which I think is a healthy thing to do. Rushing back only adds to the stress, as Tom was describing, the stress of your burning unnecessary capital, potentially burdening the abilities of the landlord to help you phase back in a successful and a partnership-like way. So we are seeing it looking more like a 4 to 8 week kind of period. Now that's not a prescribed method, but we find that's the range that people are considering of making steps to truly ease or phase back in. What that looks like is really identifying a preparedness plan. Nothing new. I'm not describing anything that people haven't seen posted on LinkedIn or Instagram or in your local newspaper or national or international newspaper. But they're taking the time to meet with their individual business units. They're taking time to meet with people in the industry and look at that preparedness plan that identifies triggers. And that's where that 4 to 8 week period allows people, based on their business, to consider the government indicators, look at the healthcare industry for indicators, consider your local area and what's important. Many parents are still teachers for a while, and PE teachers for a while in your case. Look forward to a class over in your neighborhood someday.
No problem.
And then you look at the business and market indicators of how is this going to dramatically help my business moving back in. And there's many, many more. So looking at the triggers, even when we consider it for our own business, there are an overwhelming amount of questions that people are trying to answer and not take risks that are unnecessary. And so it can, I'm just kind of going through the list for myself is, what does or who returns back and what does that look like at that moment in time? How do we put them in place in ways that are healthy, safe, and provide that business continuity that we're looking for? Is public transportation available? If you have employees that ride share, use public transportation, is that even a safe way of getting our employees back? our daycare facilities, childcare facilities available so that parents who are have that need to both be back in the office, have the ability to provide that appropriate child care, and then they set up for what we need. You know, it becomes so many factors that we have to consider. So I think, what does it look like? I think it is truly, for the next couple months, businesses mindfully setting up a phasing back in that allows them to have key checkpoints or indicators to show them what to do. And each week, each step, determining if they pull back or they move forward, with ultimately having employees back in the workspace, but in a stage or staggered shift. I just think for the next 6 months, that's kind of on everybody's mind because they can't predict. And with the fear of a second wave, we all have to kind of plan around what Tom kind of described is we understand from history there were pandemics, but we weren't prepared for this one. And so now we're learning and we're growing and we're preparing to not be caught off guard and do things right.
Yeah, well, thank you, Jennifer. A couple of key points you made in there that stuck with me, obviously one of which is to have a plan. And the other of which that there's, so much information being shared out there, whether it's on LinkedIn or through emails that you get. I think oftentimes, even business leaders, they look at the information and think that it's an easy solve, but then overlook taking the time to putting an effective plan, simple plan in place. And sometimes it seems so obvious, but taking the time to implement a plan that your entire team understands and is willing to embrace and execute is really where the time should be spent.
Yeah. That's a very fair thing to say, and giving yourself the time, engaging with your team and folks like yourself to really talk about what that means and why it's appropriate. What do you need? This is an interim, and the future is another question. So we have to think of it in that way. It's an interim that's overwhelming. Although it's only been 10 weeks, as Tom described, it feels like 10 months to some of us.
It certainly does. Yeah, it feels like 10 years.
I know. We all have
Brooks.
at this point in time, right? And
Yes, Tom.
Brooks, there are 4 things I want to bring up, and Jennifer, I'd love to get your feedback on it, because these are 4 critical. They're questions as much as they're a statement. Number 1, there have been a lot of well-educated people in our space that are asking the question or making the statement, what percentage, less than 100 of the former workforce is actually coming back into leased space, is number 1. Number 2, because of that being less than 100, does that create a decrease in demand for space, whether it's office or industrial? Number 3 is that we're seeing our clients have to really look hard at increasing the square footage per person per employee, or square footage per employee, i.e. decreasing the density, which for the last 10 years, we've been trying to figure out how to get as many people in as small a shoebox as possible. And then the other part of that is we're out right now actually looking for redundant facilities. So the first 2 create a reduction in need. The latter 2 create an increase in need. What are your comments or thoughts on that, Jennifer?
I think they're all fair consideration is my first comment. But the consideration should not be reactive. Right now, we all know that we have a challenge of rushing back and saying we're going to decrease our space because we don't know why. We may not have the funds to do it, and it's just not the right thing. So in this growing conversation, it has been around what is the purpose the office serves, and when and if I go back at any point in time, do I need to be there a full time to do the things I do as an individual or as a company, as a community? You want to think about your company as a community. So what percentages of business have embraced, I think most a high percentage have embraced this idea of work from home, work remotely, work differently. And the conversation then becomes, will that be a part of your organization moving forward? Does it benefit your organization? And then how do you evaluate your space to help determine what you need, not what size, not going in assuming the size is what the definition is, but what do you really need in order to benefit your organization? The outcome, when you are truly in a less reactive mode, but more a proactive looking to the future, will be a matter of, what did you learn in this pilot? We'll call this the world's greatest change management pilot that we're going through now. What did you learn, and how does that overlay with your people, your business, the process you go through, in a true workplace strategy approach? So Tom, I think on the back end, being a little more direct, it could mean reduction in real estate. It could mean increase in real estate. It could mean no real estate, and that individuals have more regional offices. These are all speculations. I think what we would always say is, have a conversation more about what it looks like as you are easing back in. Think about ways that you can start testing out the idea that we used to know how, let's pretend everybody worked at the office. We used to know how to work at the office together. Now we are learning or know how to work virtually. But what does work in home or work in another location work like for us is so early. So being reactive is, which I don't take your question as reactive, but I think we can get reactive if we're not careful. And I think they're all factors to consider. But I do think what we've seen, in fact, we just finished a survey of 1,500 people globally. What we found is that people still want to go back to the office. They just have a different desire to look at the purpose it serves. Or maybe said, it's less about the habits of going to the office, more about being more purposeful on why you go. And so I'm not going to give you a direct answer because it's so soon to say, but I think all of those are possibilities. When you look at your business and you customize the approach to what's going to serve your business and your people, I believe that there will be a shift, but for the positive. I don't think it'll be a complete negative. Now, I'm not the landlord, so they may disagree with me, but I think for the positive, businesses will be much more mindful in their investments on health, wellness, and business productivity and employee happiness, and how that fits in.
Brooks, there's one more component to this, more of on a macro level. It seems that the vertical markets have been hit harder by a pandemic than the horizontal markets. And therefore, at a macro level, for a global company, they're going to have to start rethinking where do they position the majority of their bodies in the intellectual property.
I agree. I think, great questions, Tom, from you. And to Jennifer's point, I think there's this customized solution that needs to be created around each individual's needs within a company, and it's based upon position. And in talking with lots of people that are working from home, I also have my personal experience with it. And I know I have a lot of relationships that are eager to get back in some capacity. What does that look like? I think it's like, to Jennifer's point, it needs to be purposeful, because there's certain things that I can do and I enjoy doing remote in a certain environment that allows for maybe deeper thinking. But I also am more creative and my energy is higher when I'm around people. And I certainly don't enjoy when I get off a conference call with 15 to 20 people, and what used to be walking out of a conference room and accomplishing in 5 minutes of sidebar conversations now takes 2 hours of follow-up via email and phone calls. So there's just a certain amount of efficiency and energy you get from an office, and in my mind, and there's a certain amount of pleasure and or efficiencies you get from working at home for different reasons, bringing in the commute. So I think there's going to be an interesting environment that is created that I think is going to be an opportunity for companies, especially vertical companies, because now companies are going to be able to evaluate how can I stand out as an organization?
Brooks, let me touch on this and one word you said that falls right into sort of our bailiwick, and that's customization. I've spent the last month 7 days a week running rent deferment models and working on strategy. I know Jennifer's done the same. That's exactly why companies like Cresa and Hendrick are critical, because to be effective, you got to have a good strategy. To have a good strategy, you got to have the right people at the table. And that's exactly what we do.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a great point, Tom. I think is having trusted advisors around you will make the conversation a little less scary. We're all having those conversations, and today I'm delighted to be a part of it with you. How you start to engage the landlord, I think that that's another really important conversation or question in this formula. Is the partnership word is critical in anything we do. So if we think about how do we begin to look at what we expect of the landlords, and what should we expect of ourselves? I think the biggest thing is the idea that you said, Tom, is partnership. It shouldn't be what do we demand the landlords do for us, because they are equally burdened in this. They have a critical infrastructure to our industry, a building. They are trying to determine the best way to handle this for the health, safety, and business continuity for all of us. So they have to be mindful too in what they're doing. And so if we think about engaging that conversation with the landlords and their preparedness plans and what it looks like, I do think it is a conversation to understand what they're doing, how they're doing it, when they're doing it, and what they expect of their tenants in this conversation. And on our part as tenants and or as consultants supporting our tenants, guiding them or clients, guiding them to have an initial understanding of their plans. What do they think they can do? What can they afford to do and not do? So they make a decision in their preparedness or prepared plans based on how the landlord can respond and how they can respond. But doing it alone, doing it without consideration of your building, occupying your building and all the complexities around your site, I would call it your experience map, almost the day in the life. When you leave the house or your employee, how do you leave? Do you leave via car? Do you walk? Do you bike? Do you take public transportation? Do you even stay in the building all day? So if you can think about your day, then you know how to partner with with the landlords and really look at it from kind of three key factors. Think about the administrative protocols and the procedures in place. So when we enter a building, is the landlord in this interim, and we're going to call this interim. Future is hard to predict, but some of these things will settle in many ways to become the norm. So in the interim, if landlords are getting pushed for this demand to reopen, although they are open, but where our sheltering in place is loosening, will they require PPE? Will we need to wear masks? Will they expect monitoring when you enter the door? Will you have phased entry points as a tenant and then phased exit points? So what are their ingress and egress plans? I don't think they want to have a strict state that really reduces the effectiveness of businesses, but they're all trying to think about this in their conversation of what is going to protect a multi-tenant facility and help keep the productivity up so that they don't add risk to themselves or to the tenants in place. So they want to be a part of that. I think they have to look at how the greater population, not just the tenants, but the consultants and clients and vendors, just think about getting FedEx to a building. Are they going to stop and test or expect certain testing done ahead of time or guarantees, just to make sure that they can track and understand in the interim and a potential of a second wave what's really needed? So thinking about the protocols of what they're putting in place, where does that leave off with the landlord? How does it help or hurt you going to the office? And is it better to phase back and not push in so soon because it could be restrictive to your productivity. And it could also burden the landlord for tenants who really do need to be there for many reasons. And then if you look at the amenities, tools, and technology that you use, so just think about any building or around the area, is the building increasing the hand sanitizer stations? Are they looking at more hands-free opportunities? Have they already gone to more sensors or other things that open the gate at a parking deck? So knowing your day in the life, are you touching things or not touching things? You know, we're all going to have this phobia.
Aversion, yeah.
The sneeze, but are we touching something? And do we need to wash our hands really quickly? And
I'll give you an elbow shake.
Exactly. I mean, the handshake, I hope, is not dead, but it might be shortly
Wow.
dying for a while. So beyond the song you use to wash your hands every day, can you get to a sink, or is there a hand sanitizer that keeps us less stressed? So, and then you go to the engineering systems and the processes in place. Legacy buildings have various systems. I think everybody in Atlanta as a landlord is looking to have energy efficient, healthy buildings, but to a point. You know, where is that? So where does that leave off, and how do they, you can't mitigate 100% of the risk, but how do the systems help to draw in fresh air, greater filtration, other ways that can help from not only a short-term, but a long-term perspective, have a healthy building so that people understand that they're starting with a good baseline. I mean, these are all things to ask now, but it is part of the discussion when you think about your business and your people. And it's really important in both of those. I know it seems odd to say both, but those people, you can do everything you want, but it doesn't mean they're going to feel safe coming back. So engage them in that conversation too.
Jennifer, that you've given some great examples of what to potentially expect of a landlord in initiating some of those conversations. What should a tenant expect of themselves, hopefully, as they keep their human element in mind and keep their employees in mind?
Yeah, that's a great question. And Tom, I enjoy you chiming in. I'm sure you're hearing it from a lot of your clients, and even thinking about your own business. Engage communication. I mean, if you think about your employees for the health, safety, and business continuity, like we talked about, your preparedness plans should have an overlay to understand your employee population. So definitely determine the day in the life. How would an employee get to the office? Why would they go to the office? And then are they within a category of risk or concerns that you should think about? And then last, do they leave the office a lot? You know, in our industry, I'm not tied to my seat throughout the day. So if I had to go through a checkpoint every 5 minutes, I would stay home or work from my car or somewhere else. And that's an over exaggerated point of view. I don't think we'll have checkpoints that stringent, but there will be stops or slowdowns. So think about your employee, think about what you will need for your employee to go back to the office in a safe manner, and why they would go back and when they go back. So really put it in that perspective and begin having conversations with them and doing surveys and individual conversations. So as an example, we just, like I mentioned, completed a survey of out to 1,500 people globally, really looking at what was important to them. And then we've continued the conversations to their perceptions. Knowing their perceptions can help to educate them and overcome their fears. So engaging with them, you may put in all the health measures that you should, as far as the social distancing, thinking about separation within the office, different uses temporarily in the office, phasing and staggering. And an employee initially is still going to feel a little stress. They're still going to feel a little anxiety. So knowing where their fears may be coming from allow you to provide the steps and the right easing back in that period, so that you don't feel they don't feel overwhelmed, and they can still be productive and bring the best of themselves to every day, or determine if they should work from home for a longer period of time. So just the conversation, engagement, understanding, but expecting from the landlord side, I think it's having a preparedness plan on our side and engaging the landlord to understand how they fit into that Think of it as having multiple counties having different, let's pretend multiple counties have different sheltering in place and different guidelines and different regulations, yet we all drive throughout these counties. So every time we go across the border, is there a different rule? It's the same in a building. If we as tenants, if we can come to some common understanding and common practice, it will allow the easing back in to be more successful. And I think that starts with engaging the landlord and our greater population in that conversation. We can't make each other do it the same way, but we should be a part of that conversation, and then educate our employees and help make it a normal part of their habits for what they can do.
Brooks, I'm somewhat chuckling. Jennifer and I have been in this business a long time, and originally more floor plans had private offices. And for about the last 10 years at least, the trend has been for more open, collaborative, less or higher density, less square footage environments per employee. And with the low partition closeness, that could have some serious ramifications as to how you cohabitate your employees and create that safe environment for them, not only just by wiping down areas, but how do they go about that? It affects the furniture industry. It's certainly, Jennifer's the leader of that because she's the one that has to study and actually design it, but that's backed up by the furniture people. I still feel like we're just now coming out of the concussed state after the bomb hit. We're starting to get a little bit clearer in our thought. We're starting to get a little bit better understanding of what the data is telling us so that we can re-strategize and move forward, but we're not there yet.
Right.
And as Jennifer touched on, knowing your employees, understanding those that are more compromised, how do you adapt for everyone? And our answer is those that are more compromised come into the office less, if any, right now. And I don't mean right now, I mean as we come back, but the other is put them in private offices. Help them contain their environment and manage that environment to their compromised immune systems. There's a lot of that that's still out there for question, but it'll be interesting, and Jennifer's on the front line of it.
Absolutely.
I think
You touched on something, Tom, with design and furniture, and I think we're bumping up to probably our allotted amount of time to be used. But I wanted to ask you, I'm really interested in your thoughts on, and Tom, chime in as well if you'd like, on how office space is going to change. We've been talking about it, but even the materials. What are some of the conversations that are happening with materials that are used in furniture?
Very fair. I think the big question is around materials that are easier to clean, perhaps that are not holding a germ for longer periods of time. They wear better. They are made, they're healthier materials. It's all conversations. I guess I'm kind of fumbling with this one because I've gone through a lot of conversations, and I think what it comes back to is that a material, like an antimicrobial material, is not going to stop a germ. It's not going to stop a virus. The question is, what materials are right for the space to allow you to have a healthy environment? And I think,
please tell me that it's not going to be like going into my doctor's office where there's a sheet of paper that gets rolled down onto the chair, and that's going to be the reception area that, when you leave, it gets ripped off and a new piece of paper gets thrown on the chair. I hope not.
well, Tom hasn't unveiled your new office plans to me, so I can't promise. But it's a very inexpensive idea.
Yeah, well,
Brooks, I'll say this.
it's a noisy idea.
It's probably going to have less fluffy fabric. How about that? Shag carpet, that ain't going to happen now. Sorry, bud.
70s are not coming back.
Yeah.
Well, I have to say, I want to thank everybody for tuning in and listening. This is truly an unprecedented time that we're in. And we need to remember that some of the sweetest things usually are born through struggle. So have a great day, everybody. And thank you, Tom and Jennifer, for joining us. Your expertise is truly appreciated. And everyone, keep your hands clean.
Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.